You can't stop chasing the dreams of your life just because when you know you can do it, you're going to have to do it all by yourself. You can't wait to be what you know. You can't wait on their affirmation. You can't wait on their approval. You can't wait on their support. Sometimes you just gotta run and look behind you and say, everybody who wants to run, run, but I can't stop running because you're not running. Listen to me, hear me. You can't stop chasing your dream just because somebody in your life will chase you. You can't stop believing in yourself just because somebody in your life will believe in you. You can't stop chasing the dreams of your life just because when you know you can do it, you're going to have to do it all by yourself. applause.
So, a massive good morning to you all today and welcome. I'm just going to adjust this so I don't chop the top of my head off. Welcome to today's edition of English Live, where we will be doing, where I will be doing a short introduction to war poetry. If you're in Key Stage 3, you may have been lucky enough to already cover a little bit of war poetry, but if not, we've got an introduction today. There are some fantastic tasks on the task sheet, and hopefully after today you'll be armed with everything you need to follow up this topic if you're interested in it, or be prepared for it when it lands on your desks at school in the future. But a few things first. So I'm going to do my hellos first today. So many, again. I'm going to have to get really good at doing this super fast to get in as many as possible. So hello to Io and Bayo, to Adrian in Leighton Buzzard, who's 10, a local. Hi, Adrian. Hello to Matthew, who's 10. A big shout out to Pauline, who has just started watching the lessons and loves them. I'm so glad. And shout out to Molly, who is 9 in Brentford. To Sophie, who is 11 in Amersham, who watches every day. That's commitment, Sophie. Thank you for joining me. And hello to Megan in Oxfordshire. Archie, who watches every day with his tadpoles in a jar. Maybe your tadpoles can become friends with Bertie. To Manashi, who wants to say well done to and thank you to their dad, who's a shopkeeper who's staying open whilst everything is closed. And a big shout out to Heather's dad, who works for the NHS. Heather's dad, thank you for everything that you are doing for all of us. We really appreciate it. And shout out to Sunny in Huddersfield, to Maya and Emma in Luton, and to Mia in Rickmansworth. Hello to all of you, and thank you very much for joining me today. So if you are new to English Live, or if you just need a reminder, I know lots of you already know this, but you can download a task sheet that looks a bit like this, that has 6 different activities aimed at different learning styles and interests and different things that might motivate you as a learner, that are all related to the topic of today's lesson. You can download this from the English Live Resources group on Facebook. And that's also the place where you can post pictures of your work or videos of your work after the lesson. And if you're a parent, please do give your learner a chance to go and look at other people's work and ask questions about their work or offer feedback. It's really nice. It's something they would normally do in the classroom, look at each other's work and give feedback. But in this situation, it's not happening. So let's keep that skill of evaluating each other's work going by giving them an opportunity to have a little look at some of those pieces of work. Right. So, war poetry. So this is quite a serious topic. There are elements of it that are quite sad. There are elements of it that are quite uplifting too. And it's a very relevant topic given that this weekend is the 75th anniversary of VE Day, which is Victory in Europe Day. Most of you will know that I'm doing a VE Day special spellathon on Friday, and I will also be reading out a few pieces of work that learners do from today's lesson that I think really stand out. So an opportunity to have your work from today's lesson read out to the thousands of people that tune in for the spellathon. So without further ado, let's get on with our starter activity today. So I would like you to write a sensory description. So sensory description means talking about what you can see, what you can hear, what you can smell, what you can feel. It's using the senses as part of your description. So I'd like you to write a sensory description of what's happening in this picture. I'll bring it really close so you can see it. I apologise that it's so small, but my printer is running out of ink and Amazon can't deliver me any more until Friday. If you can't see the picture very well, you can come up with just a sensory description of a war setting, okay, or a battle. So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to do this. If you're not quick at writing or you don't like writing, if you're doing this with your parents or your siblings, I'm quite happy for you to discuss the sensory element of a battle instead. Okay, so do what works for you as a learner. Right. Play. Good luck.
Can't wait to be what you want. You can't wait on their affirmation. You can't wait on their approval. You can't wait on their support. Sometimes you just gotta run and look behind you and say, everybody who wants to run, but I can't stop running because you're not running. Listen to me, hear me. You can't stop chasing your dream just because somebody in your life is chasing it. You can't stop believing in yourself just because somebody in your life will believe in you. You can't stop chasing the dreams of your life just because when you know when you do it, you're going to have to do it all by yourself.
Pause. Okay, well done for doing the starter activity. Hopefully it has got those brain cells moving around and you're starting to think creatively about how you would describe a war scenario or a battle scenario. Really nice sentences coming up from, I saw one from Eric, one from Angela and one from Adrian that were really nice sensory descriptions. So well done to you. And a few hellos before we move on, okay? Hello to Erica in Scotland, to Ellie and Amy in Coventry. Hi, ladies. To Elizabeth Healy, who is 8. To Mimi and Lulu in Scotland. To Holly, great name, who is 8 in East Finchley, who watches every day. Holly, thank you for joining, Holly. Fantastic. And shout out to Iona, who is 10, and to Aryan in India. And hello to everybody who's watching in India. I know there's a really big community of you tuning in every day. So thank you, and I hope you're enjoying the lessons. So the first thing I'm going to do today now is read you a very famous war poem and tell you a little bit about it before we start off on some tasks that might prepare us for writing our own war poetry. So I'll read the poem first and then I'll tell you a little bit about it afterwards. And whilst I'm reading it, if you want to close your eyes, you can, but try and picture what is happening in the poem whilst I'm reading it, okay? Dulce et decorum est by Wilfred Owen. Bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep, many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshod. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of disappointed shells that dropped behind. Gas, gas, quick boys, an ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone was still yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face like a devil sick of sin, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori. Okay, so this poem has lots of fantastic imagery in it, really descriptive about the sights and the sounds and the smells, and is really giving a clear image to you of the effects of war on the soldiers, okay, of the physical effects of them, of the pain that they're in and that they experience. This is often thought of as the war poem, okay? It reflects the true horrors of war. And we will look at another poem shortly that looks at war from a different perspective and suggests that it's a really wonderful, honourable thing to be at war. But this one has a slightly different feel to it, okay? So it's quite anti-war. So dulce et decorum est, what does it mean? Well, it comes from another war poem by Horace, and it means sweet and right, or sweet and glorious. The final line is described as an old lie. So maybe dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, which means how sweet and right it is to die for your country. Maybe the writer is suggesting that he doesn't feel like that is true, okay, that it's not something he now believes in after seeing all of the horrors of war. So that's by Wilfred Owen. He has written he wrote lots of war poetry, and I do encourage you to go and look some of those up online afterwards. If you just type in Wilfred Owen war poetry and click images, you'll just see images of lots of different poems, and you can just read those out. Okay, right, so we're going to move on to a task now. When we looked at poetic devices, I spoke to you about onomatopoeia. So can you remember what onomatopoeia is? Can you? Okay, so it's words that sound like their meaning. So it's words like bang, pop, squeal, ripple, hoot. Lots and lots of words that you could pick from that are onomatopoeic. Okay, so I'm going to give you a minute to come up with the sounds of war. So you can come up with onomatopoeic words, or you could just write down things that you think you would hear if you were in a war scenario. So you can be thinking about either a battle, or it might be in the trenches, or it might even be from a hospital bed after you've been wounded. As many ideas as you can. You can do them as a brainstorm or a list, completely up to you. Okay, I'm going to give you a minute and a half to do this because it will be really good content for you to put into your own poem. Okay, good luck, off you go. Play. Pause. Okay, hopefully you've got now a selection of sounds that you would hear during war, and either onomatopoeic words, so words like bang, pop, hiss, or if you've just listed things that you think you might be able to hear, so gunshots, crying, wailing, for example. Now, I was frowning into the webcam then because I'm quite disappointed to see some of the chat is quite negative and not really focused on the topic of the lesson. So what I will do from this point onwards, if there is any chat that I don't think is appropriate, after the lesson, I'll go in and I'll just remove the live chat facility from you. So please, can you just make sure that your chat is appropriate, okay? So you're either coming up with ideas for the lesson or asking for shout outs or saying positive things, okay? Right, a quick hello to Ethan, who is 9 in Lincoln, to Daisy, who is 9 in Liverpool, and to Saoirse, who is 10 in Rugby. I hope all of you are enjoying the lesson today, and I hope you come up with some really nice war poetry. Right. We will move on. So I would like to read to you very quickly before we move on to the next task, another war poem, but this one, as I said, is from a slightly different perspective. So this one is called The Soldier, and it's by a war poet called Rupert Brooke. You can look up all of his war poetry online in the same way you can the Wilfred Owen ones. So I'll read it to you and then I'll tell you a little bit about it before we move on to the next task. I'll pop that just out of the way there. Okay. If I should die, think only this of me, that there's some corner of a foreign field that is forever England. There shall be in that rich earth a richer dust concealed, a dust whom England bore, shaped, made aware, gave once her flowers to love, her ways to roam, a body of England's breathing English air. Washed by the rivers, blessed by the suns of home. And think, this heart all evil shed away, a pulse in the eternal mind no less. Give somewhere back the thoughts by England given, her sights and sounds, dreams happy as her day, and laughter learned of friends and gentleness, in heart at peace, under an English heaven. So this poem glorifies the role of the soldier in a war and suggests that being a soldier is a proud and honourable thing to do. Okay, so it's very different from the poem we looked at from Wilfred Owen. This one is 14 lines long. I'm wondering if anyone remembers back to our Shakespeare lesson weeks and weeks ago now, but we looked at sonnets, and I told you that sonnets are normally used as or can be used to admire something or somebody, or as an ode to somebody or something. And Rupert Brooke has cleverly used a sonnet in this way to show respect and admiration for soldiers. So if you remember, there is a certain rhyme scheme for sonnets, and that is what Rupert Brooke has done here. So if you wanted to challenge yourself after the lesson, you could look this poem up and see if you can mark out that rhyme scheme of a sonnet. It also personifies England. Okay, so it gives human qualities to England, and it suggests that England, she is the mother of her soldiers. Okay, so some really nice imagery there, really interesting and nice to read.
I found this on the web for human qualities to England, and it suggests to England she's the
Siri's getting involved today.
Check it out.
Okay, right. It's absolutely live, isn't it? There's always these little things that go wrong. Okay, so now we've looked at a poem from a different perspective, a war poem from a different perspective. I'm going to give you another short task to do. So, in the same way I asked you to come up with what you thought the sounds of war would be, this one is a task where I want you to come up with a list of feelings during the war. So you can do this from two different perspectives, in the same way that the two poems we've just looked at are from two different perspectives. So you might have a list or a brainstorm of feelings that are positive feelings, and you might also then have a list that maybe are more negative, or they might be to do with physical pain, but try and collate a really big list of words, because you'll be able to use them to fill your own poem after the lesson. Okay? Play. Good luck.
You can't wait to be what you are. You can't wait on their affirmation. You can't wait on their approval. You can't wait on their support. Sometimes you just got to run and look behind you and say, everybody who wants to run, but I can't stop running because you're not running. Listen to me, hear me. You can't stop chasing your dream just because somebody in your life is chasing it. You can't stop believing in yourself just because somebody in your life will believe in you. You can't stop chasing the dreams of your life just because when you know when you do it, you're going to have to do it all by yourself. Pause. Okay, well done for collecting a list of different feelings you might experience during war. And like I said, hopefully you can use these to fill in. I can see some great ones coming up in the chat from Tommy. Really well done. You'll be able to use these when you create your own poetry after the lesson. So before we move on to another task, I am going to read you one more final poem. I know it's a lot of me reading poems to you today, but I think with an introduction to war poetry, it's really, really important that you hear this poetry firsthand and you do try to create those images in your head based on what it is that the poet is telling you. So this poem is a little bit different from the previous two poems because this one is written by a woman. Okay, and she isn't in a battlefield. She is working in a hospital. Well, she works in a hospital as a nurse, but she's just writing this poem to her brother, and we'll talk about it a bit more after I've read it. Okay, so the poem is called To My Brother, and it's written by Vera Britton with 2 T's if you're going to look it up. Your battle wounds are scars upon my heart, received when in that grand and tragic show you played your part 2 years ago. And silver in the summer morning sun, I see the symbol of your courage
glow, that cross you won 2 years ago. Though now again you watch the shrapnel fly and hear the guns that daily louder grow as in July 2 years ago. May you endure to lead the last advance and with your men pursue the flying foe as once in France 2 years ago. So this is a poem that Vera has written about her brother just after his death in 1918. So in 1916, 2 years previous, and you see she's talking about 2 years ago, she was at work one day in a hospital in Camberwell as a nurse, and her brother came into the hospital with war wounds. And he got better, she nursed him back to health, he went back to war, and he sadly died 2 years later. Now, I think this poem is really interesting because not only is it from a female poet, so it's from a different perspective because at the time women were not involved in the battlefield. But I think it's interesting because it's from the perspective of losing loved ones, of not being a soldier yourself, of maybe being a nurse, or, I mean, the implications of war on families, on businesses, on communities was widespread. And I think that comes across a little in this poem. So when you are creating your own war poem, it doesn't necessarily need to be in a battlefield scenario, okay? You can write it reflectively as a young person today, or you can think about how you would feel being at home with a relative who was at war, or if you've lost someone at war. The possibilities are endless. Okay, so we're going to move on to one more task now. This is just like the last two. Okay, so again, I just want you to collect a brainstorm or a list of different things that you would see during war. So you can think about what you would see on the battlefield or in the trenches or in your digs, so in your room with the other soldiers whilst you're preparing to go to battle. But it may well be things that you would see around you at home. Okay, if you were thinking about World War II, you might even be considering what you would see at the time of the Blitz. Okay, the possibilities are endless. There's no right or wrong answers. I'm going to give you about a minute and a half to do this. Good luck. Play. Okay, so now at this stage, you should have either ideas in your head that you've discussed with your siblings or your adults, or some ideas written down on the page. So you should have words to do with what you could see at war, words to do with what you might feel either emotionally or physically at war, and the sounds of war. Okay, so I'm just going to pop this on here instead. These are the names of 4 very famous, Vera Brittain isn't quite as famous, but some very famous war poets from World War I. And you might find these as a good place to start if you wanted to do some research and read some of your own war poetry, go on your own war poetry adventure. Wilfred Owen, Rupert Brooke and Vera Brittain are the ones that we looked at in today's lesson. So a quick hello to John and William in Essex, to Katie and Caroline in Southport, to Karshan, to Finley in Essex, and to Abdullah, who is 11. And hello to everybody who has participated in this lesson today and now has a great big bank of words to use to write a poem. So if you're going to write a poem, it can rhyme if you want it to. It doesn't have to rhyme. It can be long, it can be short, it can be a few words per line, it can be really long lines. It's completely up to you. You have the poetic license to write in any style and about any war or any battle from any perspective. Okay, it's all down to you, your choice. So we are at the end of the lesson today. If you haven't already, please do click subscribe so you don't miss out on any of my other lessons that are coming this week. Tomorrow we have Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, not just about love, actually about hate and battles and revenge, a really complex, interesting story. And on Thursday, we have a lesson about powerful punctuation and how to use it. And then on Friday, we have my VE Day special Spellathon, in which I will be reading out some of the work that you produced from today's lesson. Do remember to post it on the Facebook group if you would like me to read it out on Friday. Thank you very much for joining me today. I know that there's lots of you asking for Bertie. He is fast asleep in the sun on the floor. He's not going to be very happy with me, but here he is. Right, Bertie, you're going to say goodbye to everybody? Maybe not. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the lesson, and I hope that it sparks a little bit of interest in war poetry and that it gives you some ideas to produce your own work. Okay, thanks very much. See you tomorrow.